Hello and welcome to the Bookcast Club, a podcast for book lovers. Today you have me, Alice, coming to you from London. I'm here with Jenny,
Hello,
who is in Norwich, and Chris,
Hello.
in Indianapolis. It's kind of hard to believe we're at this point already, but today we're going to be discussing our favourite reads of the first half of the year. And happy 4th of July, Chris. I meant to say this earlier. Thanks for giving up your bank holiday afternoon to record with us.
Well, I'm not very patriotic, but every once in a while I do think to myself how lovely it is that I don't have to eat beans and toast like you do.
Oh, but it's so good. I actually had beans on toast for dinner last night, so it's...
Paul Revere saves me from this fate.
with cheese in sometimes, if you mix cheese in.
I'm sorry, did you just say sometimes? I mean, beans on toast with cheese is literally the only way to eat it.
Do you grate it on?
Grate
or do
it
you actually
on.
Mix it
Grate
into
it
the
on.
beans?
Just...
See, I mix it in and then I grate more on top.
Good.
Chris loves these conversations.
I always wonder about the beans on toast thing. What kind of bread are we using? Or is it just like white bread? Is it like fancy bread?
I have
bread.
mine on sourdough, but that's basically because that's the only bread that we buy.
Because it's fancy.
But it works quite well because it's a good crunchiness to a sourdough piece of toast, which then actually with the sauce from the beans, my mouth is watering, by the way. It doesn't go soggy.
Doesn't go soggy. Yeah.
I mean, I object to the idea of beans on toast on principle, but I would imagine that it would need a pretty sturdy piece of bread to carry that.
Or you are a really fast eater, and then it doesn't matter because you don't give the bread time to go soggy. But yes,
are the beans you guys eat kind of sweet, or do you do super savory beans?
Well, the only correct answer to this is Heinz baked beans. Although other people do disagree and say Branston beans are quite good. I think those people are wrong.
Okay.
And they do actually have quite a lot of sugar in them.
yeah,
The reduced salt and sugar ones aren't quite the same.
They're
just not. They're not awful, but they need a lot of cheese. And yeah, they are.
Which probably is defies the whole point, isn't it, of being healthy?
Yeah,
I've got to add more cheese to it.
But I mean, this is a staple. This is what most people will grow up having. Particularly as a child, it's a really easy lunch or dinner to give a kid. Or beans on the side of pretty much anything.
Anything. But Chris can't wait to come visit.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I always joke that I can't wait to visit England, but I'm going to bring my own food.
No, our food is genuinely great these days. So
I'm
good.
sure. I think you guys probably have a better Indian food scene than we do.
Our Indian food.
We'll feed you nice food. Yeah. I wouldn't serve you up beans on toast, Chris, if you came.
I would just to prove a point.
That will have to.
Yeah.
So funny.
Beans on the side of potato waffles and sausages or chicken nuggets. There's a childhood supper for everybody.
Oh, yeah.
I can see the waffle actually.
Yeah. Right. We should probably talk about what we're here to talk about.
What a great segue.
Who's got something to share? Who's been reading anything good?
My currently reading is really boring because last time I talked about I was currently reading A Clash of Kings, which I didn't. It wasn't that long ago that we actually recorded the last time I was on, so I'm still rereading A Clash of Kings and still really enjoying it. But I've also started reading a book called Love Marriage by Monica Ali.
Oh, I've heard good things about this.
Yeah, it is pretty good. It's pretty long, and it's quite a detailed family drama, and it's focusing on an Indian family living in the UK, and the daughter of this family is about to get married to a white man, and this white man's mother is this feminist. She seemed to have been pretty prominent in second wave feminism in the UK. She's been in newspapers and all this different stuff. Was kind of this almost Gloria Steinem figure. And now that they're getting married, these families are meeting for the first time, and a very traditional Muslim Indian family meeting this woman. And pretty soon, this woman really starts to kind of take over the wedding, and she really wants the wedding to be like very traditionally Muslim, even though the daughter that's getting married is not a practicing Muslim and doesn't have a super strong faith, and that type of thing isn't important to her. It suddenly becomes like very important to this white mother-in-law, almost so that she can like virtual signal how um, how accepting she is of her son marrying a Indian Muslim and all this different stuff. And things start to get really complicated, and you start to learn everybody's backstory and their relationships to marriage and all this different stuff, because a big part of this family's history is that the parents were a love marriage, and there seems to almost be this like romantic fairy tale history about how they got together, and some certain clues are being dropped that seem to indicate that maybe that wasn't the case. And so it's a really interesting kind of deep dive into this family as tensions are arising in the lead up to this wedding. And I really, really like it. I think if you like A Place for Us by Fatima Farheen Mirza, it's really similar, because that book is also about a Muslim Indian family in the lead up to a wedding, and it also contains the dynamic of this rebellious brother. That seems to be a theme going on in this book as well, is that the brother of the bride is not living up to the parents' standards, and there's a lot of conflict in the house because of that. So it's a very similar book to A Place for Us, but I actually think the writing and the storytelling is stronger and more assured.
I was going to say, I don't recognise this book, and then I found the UK cover, and I do. So, yeah, that's it sounds really good, actually. I had no idea what it was about.
Yeah, I'm liking it quite a bit. The writing is just fantastic. Like I said, it's a pretty long book, so it's probably going to take me a little bit, but it's a great little family saga.
Yeah, I don't actually think I've read any of her books, but I know she's probably her most famous is Brick Lane, which is an absolute classic, and I've only heard good things about her writing, so I really should probably add this one to my list, because I am seeing it everywhere. And the UK cover's quite pretty as well, isn't it, Jenny?
Yeah, it's sort of lots of primary colours in like a crisscross.
Yeah.
Sort of. It's quite similar to the American. Mm-hmm. So my current read's a family saga, so I might jump in. I am reading The Paper Palace by Miranda Cowley Heller, which I know Sarah T talked about on the podcast, which must have been a while ago now, because yeah, it was probably last summer that Sarah was talking about it. But I'm really enjoying it. I stayed up far too late reading it last night. I fell asleep with it in my hand about 10 o'clock, which is usually how things go, and it's a bit hefty, so when it walloped me, because I dropped it and then woke up, I was like, I've got to sit up properly and read this. I cannot read 3 pages a night. I will never finish anything ever again. And then I ended up staying far too late up reading it, and then Robin was up at 6 this morning, so that'll serve me right. But yeah, I'm really enjoying it, and I've not read a book that I've just kind of wanted to keep reading, that I found really compelling to just keep reading through. I spoke about it with Sarah briefly, because I just started it in our June bonus episode, but it's set on two different timelines, one that spans about 50 years and then one that spans 24 hours, and it starts with our main character Elle having an affair with it's terrible, I cannot remember the man's name.
Jonas.
I'm reading it. Jonas, yes, thank you. Yeah, so it opens with her having this affair having sex with Jonas, and you learn that every summer they go to the Paper Palace, which is their family holiday home in Cape Cod, and you soon firstly the setting's really good, like her writing's really good, and it's a debut novel, but her sense of place is fantastic, so it's a very summery read, which is why me and Sarah were talking about it. And the story follows her having this affair, but then it obviously then keeps jumping back in time, and we're following this 50-year narrative as well, where you find out why her and Jonas, who is quite clearly the like deep love of her life, you can just tell, you find out why they never ended up together. So I'm just over halfway through. With just it's probably should come with trigger warnings for some sexual violence, which I hadn't realised was in there until obviously I got to it. Although there's a little bit of foreboding that happens at the start, so you kind of do know it's coming. But yeah, so obviously this event has happened in her childhood, and it must take darker turns than it already has, because there's a reason that they didn't get together, and I don't think they spoke to each other for years until this particular meet-up. So yeah, I'm really, really enjoying it, and it's one of those ones that I kind of avoided a bit because it's everywhere. But yeah, I shouldn't have done. I'm enjoying it a lot.
I avoided that one because it was a Reese Witherspoon book club pick, and I'm pretentious.
I love that.
See, now Sarah talked about it before it was a Reese Witherspoon pick, so I'm kind of like, I'm okay with that. But yeah, I think it's really, really well written.
I've heard it's really good.
Yeah.
I've heard it's like better than a lot of the Reese Witherspoon picks.
I've also heard very good things about this one, and it is on my want to read list.
You definitely like it, Alice.
I was just reading the description, which is how I knew the guy's name, and I was like, this sounds right up my street. I
think you'd really.
I've seen it everywhere. I need to just get on it and buy some more books.
Yes.
And then a lot of the reviews of people that don't like it is because they don't like the sex in it, which is usually a sign that I probably will.
Jenny, you love some smut. Although there is a review on Goodreads which is very amusing, and kind of mocks the writing style for being quite flowery, and they were saying, I've set a record with this one. Sometimes I DNF early, usually around 25%, sometimes before that, but I quit here in the middle of the third sentence. So
it is
much to
now
write
I
a
like
review
writing
off of.
like that. Yeah, I like if it's done well. I said to Sarah on the episode we did that it reminded me a little bit of Maggie O'Farrell's writing. It is descriptive, and she does there you go, Chris, not for you. She does. I like it because it's all gives a like sense of setting, including when they're just in their kitchen. Like I don't mind being told how someone's making coffee and that sort of thing. That is usually people's complaint, is that they don't like being told how somebody is making coffee, whereas I quite like stuff like that.
I love descriptive, and not to derail us, but I have to get an opportunity to crap on Maggie O'Farrell here. I don't mind descriptive. I hate Maggie O'Farrell's writing with a burning passion, and she's descriptive, but what she does is she has these like patterns where she'll like end a sentence with 3 adjectives over and over and over, just like listing them, and I'm like, oh my god, I get it. You can stop now.
I mean,
but proceed.
I won't lie, I couldn't get into Hamnet possibly for the same reason, and yeah, so this is making me a little.
I loved Hamnet, but I listened to it,
which maybe audio. I should do.
And I loved her non-fiction. It's one of my favourite books, but other than that I've never read anything by her. Actually, I started one and had to put it down, so
yes.
That was the Heatwave one, whatever that one is.
I know which one you're talking about, but I can't remember.
I gave up on that one. So maybe we're actually all on the same page for Maggie O'Farrell.
I love descriptive writing, but Maggie O'Farrell really gets under my skin. But no,
maybe that was a bad comparison.
Yeah, the Paper Palace sounds really good. I actually own it. I got it. It was sold out everywhere here. Like, you could not get your hands on it.
Wow. Bloody Reese.
And I had to wait on the paperback to come out before I could get a copy. So I did get a copy though, and I'm very excited to read it.
Oh yeah, I'm intrigued to see what you two would make of it.
Yeah,
it's probably going to be my next one, actually.
The Heatwave one is just called Instructions for a Heatwave,
right.
by the way.
Instructions for a Heatwave, that's the one.
Yeah. So I am currently reading a book that is a cross between a memoir and a cookbook, And Jenny, I'm going to give you a guess as to what it might be.
A
based
memoir
on
and a
that.
cookbook, like a new one.
Yeah.
A new release.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I don't know. I'm going to be annoyed when you tell me. Go on.
It is The Year of Miracles by Ella Risbridger, which is...
okay. I didn't know she had a new one out.
Yes, it's a new one, and look at this cover. Isn't it brilliant? It's, so obviously this is audio, so you can't see. It's a windowsill with some plants growing on it, and the text is in like neon pink. It's incredible.
Is it like a watercolour?
It is. It's watercolour.
With all like me and Chris appearing into the screen.
Sorry, my screen is actually quite dark. It's quite dim in my room. And this is her second memoir. Her first was Midnight Chicken, but actually her fourth book. So her other two, in addition to Midnight Chicken, are Set Me on Fire, which is a poetry anthology, which I actually love. It's got the subtitle of A Poem for Every Feeling, and it really is fantastic. And The Secret Detectives, which is a YA novel that she wrote and I think was published last year, possibly in 2020. And The Year of Miracles is, much like Midnight Chicken, a mix of recipe book and memoir. Midnight Chicken talks a lot about her life in, I think, like about the mid 2010s, when her her partner was dying of cancer, basically, and kind of she was in her early 20s at the time, I think, and she was also really struggling with her mental health. And it's about, you know, how you deal with life when life is horrible and how cooking can really help. And that's a massive oversimplification, but it's a wonderful, wonderful book. And if you've struggled with your mental health at all, I would really recommend reading it. It's brilliant to the point that it was actually published in paperback, which is almost unheard of for a recipe book. Nigel Slater's are some of the only ones I can think of that were published in paperback as well. And it's like a proper pocket-sized paperback. It's like a novel. And so her writing is great. And this book is structured with a chapter per month of the year, and it's set in 2020. And you can tell from the start of the book that she started to write this, or started to jot ideas for this down before COVID hit. And it's a really, really wonderful charting of that year in a very, very beautiful, very, very tender way. But overall, the book is really mostly about love and friendship and grief and growing things. And I mean, to be fair, that's basically the subtitle of the book, is recipes about love and grief and growing things. So I have pretty much hit the nail on the head there. And it's got some seriously delicious sounding recipes throughout. And it's about how, despite all of like the chaos and all of the awful things that were happening, particularly in that year, but happen at any time, you know, friends still exist, people still need to eat, things can be planted, and love does actually still exist. It's all still there in amongst all of the crap that's happening around you. And yeah, this book is just really like a meditation on those things, and she reflects on grief and love and coming to terms with those kind of messy realities and how people affect us in good ways and not good ways. And you know, how even when we love people very much, we can resent them for things that they do, and simultaneously like not resent them because of how much we love them. And it's just brilliantly written. It's very much musings and thoughts. And if you look on Goodreads, there's a few people who really don't like that, and the book isn't really for them. And also you'll also see a few people who are like, this isn't a recipe book. So if you're going to it for the recipes, that's also not the point of the book. The recipes are almost incidental. There's a few of them that are quite detailed and specific. Like there's one for cardamom buns, which by nature of it being bread making has to be quite specific. But there's also quite simple recipes, which are very much throw a bit of this in the pan, have a taste. What do you think? Do you think it needs this? It'll all be okay if you've not got one of these ingredients, which I also really quite like, because I basically want Ella Risbridger to be my friend, which is a bit of a weird thing to say about somebody whose writing you've read but who you've never met. But because she still lives near to where I used to live, there's a lot of references to that area in the book, and that makes me feel like I am just reading something that's been jotted down by a friend who lives nearby.
You stalk her, Alice, don't you?
No. No, I don't. But she talks a lot about Southeast London. And if you live in Southeast London, there's some places that are very, very, very recognisable in here. And she's not, I mean, I couldn't tell you where in Southeast London she lives, but some of the references to the park and the heath and some of the bakeries and how you get to like from the park to this bakery. I'm like, oh, I know exactly which one she's talking about. So I'm not stalking her. Ella, please don't be scared.
No, I'd really like to read, well, Midnight Chicken to start with. I know you've talked about it fondly before, so it's definitely on the list. Chris, have you heard of her? I feel like you're not going to have heard of her.
I haven't. Now, what would you say like the ratio of like writing to recipes is? Like, is it like mostly like one essay and then a recipe, like 1 month and a recipe, or is it kind of, I don't know.
It's a good question. It's one essay and then a recipe.
Interesting.
The essays are generally only about a page, half a page to a page, sometimes a page and a half. They're not long pieces. A couple of them are a bit longer.
Do the recipes like fit in directly to the essays? Okay.
Generally speaking, yeah. So there's one for a pistachio tart, which I'm dying to make, like pistachio and raspberry. And she made it for Valentine's Day for her friend. So it kind of fits into that whole story of that. And and that example is, you know, it's a story about how you feel about Valentine's Day and how she apparently made this for her friends on that day. And obviously whether or not that's technically true is, you know, to be debated. But I like to think that it is actually what she made for her friends on Valentine's Day.
It is. We believe her.
We believe her.
You, Ella, and Alice isn't stalking you, promise.
No. I'm really sorry. I feel like I've just gone like a little bit too gushy.
That sounds really, really good.
It's brilliant. And she's a British writer. She spent some time growing up, as I understand it from the book, in the Middle East. So there's some Middle Eastern influences. And she talks a lot about, which I think is really relevant to the COVID setting, about what it takes to make a home and what's a household, and how you sometimes will cook something for somebody that isn't necessarily what you would want to eat, but it's because you know it's what they would want to eat. Sometimes on the other side, you cook something that you know that other person that you live with isn't actually going to like very much, but you really want to eat it, and that's just how it goes sometimes. And I love that because I think we've all been there, whether we're cooking for a friend or a loved one. Sometimes it's just, I'm cooking this because I really want to eat it, and other times it's, okay, fine, I don't really want to eat pasta, but I'll do it because I know you've had a bad day and I know that will make you happy. So I love that.
This is where we take a little break to tell you about all the different ways you can support the podcast, some of which are totally free. A really effective and easy way of showing your support is by rating and reviewing us on iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcasts. There is a link in the show notes that will take you straight to the Apple Podcast page where you can write a review. And if you listen on Spotify, you can now very easily give us a star rating. You can also share our posts on social media. We are at Bookcast Club on both Instagram and Twitter. You can sign up to our free monthly newsletter where we share even more book recommendations and all the latest podcast news. But the best way for us to find new listeners is by you telling your book-loving friends and family about us. If you want to support the podcast financially, we do have a Patreon account. You can sign up for as little as £2 a month. We offer early access to the podcast, monthly bonus episodes, and our top tier will get you all of the above and personalized book recommendations. We get you to fill in a survey, and then we tailor our book recommendations to your preferences. We will also send you books in the post. There are over 15 bonus episodes you can get instant access to if you sign up as a patron today. The link is in our show notes. But however you choose to show your support, we as always want to say a huge thank you. We appreciate each and every one of our listeners.
So now we're going to talk about our favourite books of the first half of the year. I think we've each got 3. Is that right, guys?
Yes.
Yeah, I got 3.
Excellent. I will say, just to preface, I've only read 10 books in the first half of the year. And
I haven't read much more than that.
Yeah, so I think I've definitely spoken about 2 of mine, and I think the third I haven't. So apologies in advance if I'm repetitive.
I think I've only talked about 1 of mine, I think.
amazingly not spoken very much about two of them.
Excellent.
By coincidence, because they've all been like the last few books that I've read. I thought I was cruising towards a shit first half of the year. but then I've read like, a good sort of few books in a row that I've really enjoyed. So yeah, I haven't spoken about them all.
Jenny, do you want to go first in that case?
Yeah, I can do. So the first one I've written down, I'm going to find really hard to tell you what it is about. But that's Woman Eating by Claire Kohda, which I probably talked about in like a current read situation, but I definitely haven't talked about it in detail on here. It's about a girl called Lydia who is a vampire, and she is doing an internship in London at an art gallery. Now, one of the first reviews I looked at on Goodreads earlier was like, it's no plot, all vibes. And it's definitely one of those books. So if you kind of enjoy that sort of, what do they describe them as? Are they sad girl books? Is that what they get described as?
Is it like
is that a TikTok thing?
I've heard it described as like or maybe I'm overstepping, but I thought it was, I've seen the millennial disaster woman trend or something like that.
Oh my god.
But that's how they've seen them described.
I mean, it fits.
It's the disaster woman novel.
I suspect it is a TikTok trend to call them this, but it's a very succinct way of describing it. It definitely is plotless, and I do quite like books like that. I liked how subtle it was all the way through. So she's a mixed race vampire, and you get hints of the fact that she's come from a fairly abusive parent-child relationship, even though she doesn't describe it as that. I don't know if either of you have read or seen Carrie, but her mother in this reminds me a lot of, not as over the top, but a lot of Carrie's mother in Carrie, who is very, very religious, very like self-condemning, and therefore self-condemning of her daughter as well. So they have that sort of relationship. So she's always just like, the mother is always describing them as being like unworthy of feeding on human blood, like they're disgusting, they're dirty, we only eat pig's blood because we're not worthy of eating human blood, and she projects that onto her daughter. So there's like this strange abusive relationship that goes on, and she lives off pig's blood, which she's finding hard to source in London, but other than that, there really isn't a plot to it. So you kind of follow her day-to-day life. She goes to the art gallery. You can see a kind of relationship developing between her and the like supervisor of the flats that she lives in, who's also part of the art scene and part of this art gallery. And the ending's fantastic. So I really loved the ending. The ending is really satisfying and what you want from it the whole time. But yeah, it's a really subtle book, and I'm a bit kind of, I've written down that it's like a gentle meandering book, but it's gentle and meandering then with like quite graphic events that happen. So at one point I think it's a duck or a seagull that she just has to take home and eat, because she hasn't eaten for ages. And it gets left in the sink, and then this chap that she quite likes comes around, and this disgusting duck is in the sink. And then there's another bit where she steals like a puppet from the art gallery, like a is it Baba Yaga or the other way around?
Baba Yaga. Yeah,
so she steals a puppet from the art gallery, and there's just something sinister that runs the whole way through it. And she's always kind of talking to this puppet and keeps it in her bag and stuff, but nothing ever happens with it. So it's definitely a no plot, all vibes book, but I really enjoyed it, and I find that balance quite tricky to enjoy. I read Night Bitch last year, and that's similar, and I remember talking about that on the podcast and enjoying elements of that. But then that particular book just went too far for me. It just went beyond the realms of me being able to cope with the arty weirdness in it. But this one I really, really enjoyed, and there's something compelling about it because I couldn't put it down, which for a book with no plot is interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I have two main thoughts on this. One, I don't believe that it would actually be difficult to get hold of pig's blood in London, given that that's exactly what black pudding is made of. I
can't remember what the issue is with the with the pig's blood. She has to buy it like dried. She can't get it sort of fresh. Liquidy in a bag. Okay. I don't know.
Which makes more sense then, because I was just listening to that thinking, black pudding is literally pig's blood. So I'm very confused by this.
She's like trying to make it with like paste or something.
Okay.
I don't know.
I mean, I'll have to read it to find out. Not enjoyable. No.
She's not enjoying the pig's blood.
She's not enjoying the pig's blood that she can get. And two, it sounds like the most you book that you've described in ages.
Yeah, it probably is why I like.
I did have a third point, which was, I remember you talking about the fact that you were going to read this a little while ago, maybe back in like April, May.
And I thought it had a testicle on the front cover.
Yes. Was it?
No, it wasn't.
That's what I said.
Sarah, she wanted a mention on this episode. She is about to get it. Sarah sent me a message. God, what am I going to have to search my WhatsApp messages to find this testicle? Okay, so she asked me if the testicle was a testicle, which I don't think it was in this, but it could have been. I mean, it was a no plot, no vibes book, and she definitely does stuff with men. I was just discussing the testicle yes or no issue with a friend who is in med, and he was like, it does look like a histological staining of a testicle, actually. So,
are we talking about this?
No, I was right.
Was the apple with the veins in it?
Yes.
We think that looks like a testicle.
I thought it was a plum, so clearly my mind is a lot more innocent than both of yours.
A testy?
I just thought it looked kind of representative of a testicle, and Sarah's medical friend said it does look like one.
Jenny,
so...
I think head, gutter, remove it.
I think your head's in the gutter.
No. I thought it was a piece of fruit.
Yeah, I thought it was just a piece of fruit.
It is a piece of fruit, but it looks like a testicle. It's suggestive, okay? Look.
Jenny, it's
the US edition is much nicer than the testicle front cover. So I'm sorry, but if I thought it looked like a testicle, there's bound to be somebody else out there that did. And they should have chosen a better front cover.
Oh, excellent. It's so good, Jenny. Jenny, you're great.
Okay, well, mine's much more timid. For my first one is going to be The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman. This is my first Neil Gaiman.
I love this book.
Oh, it's so good. It's so short and just like masterful. So it's about a guy who at the beginning of the book, he's going to a funeral. And I think Sussex, England or somewhere. And this forces him to revisit his childhood home and to revisit this childhood neighbor family that he knew. And then the story goes on to tell the story of his childhood and his relationship with these people that lived in this house where there was this pond in the back of their house that they called the ocean. And the family seems to be magical. They seem to be immortal. They seem to have this connection with, I guess, the Fae world. And you're never quite sure as you're reading how much of the story you're supposed to believe and how much of the story is an overactive children's imagination and all this different stuff, which is just completely brilliant. And what ends up happening, the kind of inciting incident of the book, is that his family had opened up their home to tenants, and one of the tenants ends up killing himself at the end of the road. And this seems to unleash this like dark force on his childhood, and this darkness seems to open up because of this. And a woman ends up moving in with them to be a nanny, and she's actually like this possessed dark spirit that's after him. And the book is about how he's constantly trying to avoid her clutches and escape from her and find solace in this family. And nobody in his family is taking his allegations seriously. And it's about like the dangers of childhood and the way that children are dismissed. It's about the way, the fears of childhood feel so real in this book. Like this book made me feel like a scared little kid as I was reading it. And it was just incredibly brilliant the way that it worked out. I loved the storytelling. I loved the magical aspects. I loved trying to figure out what I believed was real, what wasn't, what was going on with this family. All of the little elements worked perfectly. And Neil Gaiman's writing is delightful. Just a wonderful sentence by sentence writer. Completely captured me. I read it so quickly. I think I read it in like a day or two. And yeah, just a short, perfect book.
Yeah, it was my first Neil Gaiman as well, and I felt exactly the same about it. It's just so clever and so brilliant, and you're completely right, it's so evocative.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I remember feeling a bit confused as to kind of whether I should be feeling scared by it or if I should know something else was really going on. And yeah, it's just brilliant.
Yeah, it is really good. And I love the way the story is kind of framed, because it opens up with him in the intro going back to this house and meeting this old woman that used to live there. And then the book ends with him at the house again talking to the old woman, and you find out, like, I don't want to spoil anything, but it forces you to like look back on the whole story, and just like the way it bookends everything is just completely brilliant. Like, really, really good.
I'm going to say what I always say, and that I own it and haven't read it. I remember buying it when it first came out, and I don't know why I haven't gotten to it yet. It's a play now, isn't it?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like the play has won quite a lot of awards. They had it on at the National for quite a while, and then
very positive things about it.
Yeah, it's very clever. My first favourite book of the first half of the year, that's hard to say quickly, is Stanley Tucci's Taste, which I loved and adored.
This is my honourable mentions. That's going to save us some time at the end.
Very, very good. It's something that I know I've talked about a bit on the podcast before, so I'm not going to go into too much detail. But if you missed that episode, this is Stanley Tucci's autobiography. Clearly, there is a theme for me at the moment, as always, with food and memoir. It's a big thing. And this book just charts his life growing up Italian-American, and the food of his childhood and adolescence, and the role that food has played in his life as he's grown up and moved into adulthood. And it's a wonderful, wonderful book. It does come with a trigger warning for cancer, or a content note for cancer, because that does feature in the book just based on some events that have happened in his life. But it is so heartwarming and so brilliant, and the food in it sounds delicious. Like, one of the recipes, I listened to this on audiobook, which is actually narrated by Stanley Tucci himself, so I would really, really, really recommend it as an audiobook. It's very, very well read, as you'd expect. But one of the recipes just sounded so delicious that I was on the bus home from work and I replayed it like 3 times, slowed down to like half speed, just so I could write it down. I haven't made it, I'm not going to lie, but it sounded amazing, and it's on my list for the summer because it has courgettes in it. And he's just a brilliant writer. I'm sure he's had some editing help, but actually when he reads it, it reads as somebody would speak, so it's very natural, it's very witty, it's very heartwarming, and it's just brilliant. And I really do think that everybody should read it. Even if you don't think you're a fan of Stanley Tucci, you really will be by the end of it.
Yeah, I enjoyed that one a lot. And if you like sort of a little sort of look into celebrity lifestyles, he has some very famous friends who he talks about. I particularly like his relationship with Ryan Reynolds.
That's very funny and very sweet. My other favourite bit is when he's in France with Meryl Streep. That's just
I was going to
hilarious.
Say this, but you'd accuse me of being dirty, and I'm not talking about it. Alice has brought it up, not me.
I wasn't going to spoil it. I wasn't going to say anything more than that. There's just a very, very funny bit at a restaurant in France with Meryl Streep. And I will leave it there because it really, really is just best read and or listened to and experienced. I had tears streaming down my face on the bus. It was so funny.
So my next one, again, I've briefly talked about it before. I've definitely spoken about it in the podcast. So my next one is Everyone in This Room Will Someday Be Dead by Emily Austen. This book is a little more twee than the other ones, although it definitely has sort of dark content, but it is a bit more twee. This is about a girl called Gilda who ends up working as a receptionist in a Catholic church. She's gay. She's gone there to go to a therapy session, and when she's turned up, the vicar thinks she's there to apply for the job as a receptionist, which she doesn't deny because she's a people pleaser and she doesn't like to say no, and she ends up taking on this job as the receptionist, and you follow her trials and tribulations as somebody who struggles with anxiety and an inability to say no to people. She particularly gets in trouble when she's replying to emails that the previous lady who's died because she was elderly hasn't responded to, and one is from one of her very good friends, and she doesn't have the heart to tell her that her friend has died, so she just pretends to be her. So it's the whole book is along that vein, and you can see she's going to get into more and more trouble as the story goes on, and it's a little bit twee. It reminded me of Eleanor Oliphant Is Completely Fine, so if you didn't like that, I don't think you'd like this one. However, I really related to Gilda as the main character. I thought her mental health issues were dealt with really, really well. I don't like it being described as a hypochondriac, but that is probably what she is, and probably what I am. I like to call it health anxiety, but she is always thinking about dying and death and worrying that every little ailment she has means she's going to die, and it's something that I struggle with. I've lost people that are very close to me to cancer, and it's made it worse. I had it before, but it's made it a lot worse. So every little thing I have, I can make lead to me dying, and unless I've got my methods of controlling it. But yeah, just, in the sake of being honest, that is something that I struggle with, and this is what she struggles with, but to quite an extreme level. However, the book is very, very funny, and I think to read about a mental health condition that you suffer with but find it funny is very clever, and a sign that it's very well handled, I felt. So I loved her as the main character. I'd say that Eleanor Oliphant Is Completely Fine is more accomplished in how that book wraps itself up at the end. This one felt a bit clunky towards the end, but I did enjoy it a lot. It's a debut novel, so although I feel like Eleanor Oliphant was a debut as well, I just felt it got a little bit clunky and a little bit heavy-handed towards the end, but I did enjoy it, and I really liked the main protagonist. I thought it was very cleverly handled.
Nice. I've not even heard of that one yet. That sounds really good.
Again, the US edition, I don't normally prefer the US edition, but the US edition is much nicer than the UK edition. The US edition's got lots of different coloured rabbits on it.
What was it called again, the full title?
Everyone in This Room Will Someday Be Dead.
Okay.
I've heard...
mouthful.
It is. I've heard good things about this book, but I don't think it's one I'm going to pick up, partly based on your review there, because I really wasn't a fan of Eleanor Oliphant Is Completely Fine. There was just something about it that really didn't speak to me.
This one's storyline is more fun. So this one's more she gets into lots of trouble, and you can see where it's heading because it turns into a bit of a murder mystery, and then you can see where it's going to go because she's been telling all these lies and sort of getting herself into a right pickle. So I'd say the actual storyline is much more fun than Eleanor Oliphant. Like, Eleanor Oliphant is quite a serious book, and this one's a lot lighter, which is surprising because of the title.
I'm quite certain I'm the only person in like the book internet that has not read Eleanor Oliphant.
I personally don't think you're missing a lot,
Chris. So don't worry.
I was just kind of put off by the descriptions of it back in the day, but maybe one day. But the book you just described sounds really, really good. My next one is Across the Nightingale Floor by Lian Hearn, which I absolutely loved. And I have talked a little bit about it on the podcast, so I won't go into too much detail, but it's an epic fantasy inspired by feudal Japan. And it's following a young man named... I've already forgotten the name, but anyway, he's a young man, and he lives in this kind of cloistered village in this religious sect called the Hidden, and they're kind of a persecuted group of people. And when the book opens up, this lord has basically decided to attack this village because he knows that some of the Hidden reside there. And this young man barely makes it out of the village alive, and he's rescued by this lord of the Otori. And this lord of the Otori actually kind of already has a feud with the lord that had attacked this young man's village. He ends up adopting this young man and raising him as his kind of heir. And you soon learn that actually this young man has some special magical abilities to do with this very like supersonic hearing, and actually his true ancestry probably goes back to this group of people that are kind of like ninjas. So all of this sounds like very stereotypical YA adventure fantasy. Young boy is rescued into a greater destiny, realizing that he has like magical powers. But what really I think seals the deal on how lovely this book is the writing style. It is elegant, it is sweeping, it completely takes you it's one of those writing styles that it just feels like it's warmly inviting you in and setting the scene, and in a way that just feels fresh and beautiful. I loved the way that she evoked this feudal Japanese inspired fantasy world. And the characters are the type of characters I think it's just difficult not to fall in love with them. They're just incredibly good people. They're put into this very interesting situation. And the big thrust of the book is that he is trying to assassinate this lord that attacked his village. And the lord has a Nightingale floor, which is this floor, which was a real type of floor back in the day, that when you step on it, it creaks and it sounds like the cry of a nightingale. And it's to protect the lord from intruders and people that would assassinate him. And so he would sleep on this Nightingale floor, and this young man is practicing to walk across the Nightingale floor without making a sound and assassinate this guy. So if you like assassin fantasy, great writing. And what's awesome is that I would definitely describe this as epic fantasy given its scope, setting, and this kind of sweeping nature of it. And yet the novel is really short. Like it's like a 250, 300 page book. So if fantasy kind of turns you off sometimes because it's too long, definitely think this is a good one.
It's a trilogy, isn't it?
It was originally a trilogy, and then it turned into 5 books.
Ah, okay. In the grand scheme of things, I don't have many fantasy books on my TBR, but these books I've had on my TBR since I probably signed up to Goodreads, which was like 15 years ago or something, if not longer. So yeah, it was nice to be reminded of them. I definitely would like to read them.
I remember reading Across the Nightingale Floor, and I think the second one, at least the second one, possibly the third one, as a teenager, and it really, really stuck with me. Like, I have these really, really vivid mental images of scenes in the book. And that's not very common for me from books I read as a teenager. These, and also particularly not fantasy, because that's not really ever been my genre, as it were. But no, I just remember this being amazing. And I completely agree with what you say, Chris, about the length of it being really accessible. It's just so perfectly pitched and so neat, because I think a lot of fantasy can get quite meandering. Just look at The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, right? That's very meandering. Amazing, but meandering. And this just is much more concise and clear and accessible in that way. And yeah, I'm glad you liked
the whole
it.
thing is so economical, like her choice of
Yeah.
storytelling technique, writing style, everything, but without sacrificing the kind of lushness and grandeur of epic fantasy.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just wonderful. Really, really beautiful book. And I love the idea of a Nightingale floor. Every time I step on a creaky floor, every time I step on a creaky floorboard, I think about it.
Yeah, it's really cool. If you look up videos of them, they're really cool too. And they do sound like a nightingale.
So, my second book of the year is The Song of Achilles by Madeleine Miller, which I thought I read last year, to be honest, but according to my Goodreads, I did not. So, I must have read it really, really, really early in the year. And I just loved this book. It's wonderful. I know I talked about it before, so again, I'm not going to labour the point, but it is an adaptation of Homer's Iliad. So if you're familiar with the Iliad, it is worth noting that this does actually stay very, very close. And unlike some of the other Greek mythology adaptations that have been around recently, which have taken quite a lot of liberties, which, to be fair, absolutely fine to do. These stories are thousands of years old and can stand to be updated. It's quite nice sometimes to read one that's from the perspective of a slightly more minor character, but is actually staying quite close to the original source material. So this is basically the story of Patroclus and Achilles, and really focuses in on the Trojan War. And Patroclus and Achilles grew up together, and the concept of the Song of Achilles is that they fall in love. And when Patroclus has to go and fight the Trojan War because he signed a blood oath when he was a teenager to protect... to support Menelaus's marriage to Helen, he has to go when Paris kidnaps Helen, or Helen runs away with Paris, depending on how you look at it. And he has to go and fight the Trojan War. And Achilles also goes for various reasons, to be honest, which are kind of more detailed in the book and is a bit long-winded to explain now. So it's a really, really, really wonderful love story between the two characters, to be honest. It is a real coming-of-age story as well, because they go from being young boys running around the castle together, basically, and kind of growing up in Greece. Well, not Greece at the time, but, and they build this incredible friendship and relationship, which is just beautifully pitched. And I'm not going to spoil the ending. Obviously, if you don't know the story, you've got a lot waiting for you. If you do know the story, I don't need to spoil it for you. So I'm going to lean on the side of people who don't know what happens in the Iliad and how it comes to an end. But I just loved it. I'm already dying to reread it. And there have been so many retellings of Greek myths recently, some of which I've liked, some of which I've not read yet. But this one it's just an absolute classic. I mean, this book came out in 2011 and has recently had the resurgence because of TikTok, I think. And it's so good that it has, because I don't think I was that familiar with it before. I think I'd heard of it, but not really. And just... you've got to read it. It's lovely.
Yeah, I loved it. It was so good.
Yeah.
The writing is just
brilliant.
I need
to try it. I didn't love Circe, so I think that put me off.
This is better than Circe, I think. Circe, I'm surprised you didn't like, to be honest, because I love the witchy vibes in it.
Me and you read it together, didn't we?
We did.
No, actually, I found it boring.
So the only person who really crops up in both, I think, is Odysseus. And Odysseus is much cooler in The Song of Achilles, as he is in the Iliad versus the Odyssey, to be honest. He's a bit more badass. So, he's good fun in this. And I think actually reading the two together is quite a good thing. But I do think you should give it a go, Jenny. I think you'd really like it.
I think I'd enjoy it. I do like the kind of ancient Greek Trojan War retellings. I feel like I'd read the Pat Barker one when they came out at a very similar time.
Silence of the Girls. I read them back to back, to be honest, and Song of Achilles stays closer to the Iliad, for the most part, I would say. Briseis is a much more minor character in Song of Achilles, where she's obviously the main character of Silence of the Girls. So it depends on what you didn't.
I really liked the Silence of the Girls, but I think when you've read one, I personally needed distance, and obviously now I've had about 5 years distance, so I probably could
might be time.
Pick that one up now. Okay, I'm on to my last one. Now this one I have talked about recently, but I hadn't finished it, and that is, we had to remove this post, and Sarah did tell me how to pronounce this author's surname, but I'm not going to be able to. Hanna Bervoets. It definitely wasn't Bervoets, which is how I said it originally. It's translated from the Dutch by Emma Ralt, and it's about a girl called Cowley who works for a company called Hexa, who basically moderate online social media posts, and that company works for an unnamed social media organization, but it's quite heavily implied that it's Facebook, and it's a novella, so it's short, and you follow Cowley and her life working at this company and her friendships within this company. And where I'd got to when I spoke about it a couple of episodes ago was that you were just starting to see her relationship with her friends and her friendship group, and they were at the pub and they say quite outrageous things, which is quite jarring for somebody who wouldn't say that sort of stuff, but for them it's quite normal, and their conversations were quite homophobic, even though there were queer people within their friendship group, and you just started to see that those barriers that we have and those boundaries that we have are starting to be broken down clearly by the job that they do and the things that they witness. So it carries on in that vein, and you see the breakdown of friendships, and a few of the friendship group kind of succumb to some quite strange conspiracy theories. Like, a few of them talk about the flat earth theory, in detail, that they obviously believe, and you can see the influence of what they're moderating, you can see the influence it's having on their lives. And as it goes on, it suddenly, you end up just in Cowley's head, and I thought, I don't really know where this is going now. We're starting to meander a little bit. She describes some of the stuff she does, which is a little bit weird, but you don't question it too much. And then I reached the end, which I thought was really, really fantastic, how they kind of revealed what was actually going on. When she starts having conversations with certain people, you realise the behaviours she's starting to show or has been showing, but obviously because she's an unreliable narrator, we don't really get that perspective. And again, this is a book with a really, really fantastic ending. So although the middle, I thought, I don't think I'm going to enjoy this book as much as I thought when I started it, and should this be a novella or should it just have been a short story? How it wraps up, I thought was really, really clever, and it really got me thinking about the whole situation again, which is what I described in the episode that we recorded, was it really made you think. But yeah, I thought it was really good. All the books I've talked about, I've given 4 stars. I don't think I've given any 5 stars this year, but they're all solid 4 stars.
That's surprising.
I don't give out 5 stars very easily.
Well, that sounds really good.
Do.
Yeah, it is good, and because it's a novella, I think it's really worth it. It's a really worthwhile read.
All right, so my last one is a memoir, and this is Leaving the Witness, Exiting a Religion and Finding a Life by Amber Scorah. This is my favorite book I've read in a really, really long time, and it's pretty personally significant for me. So this is about Amber's life as a missionary for the Jehovah's Witnesses in China. Now, she's obviously now an ex-Jehovah's Witness, and it was her experience in China that forced her to realize that these, like, religious beliefs that meant so much to her that she wanted to travel across the world to convert people. It was her experience in China that forced her to realize that these things didn't make sense to her anymore, and that she was living under some really strict authoritarian control in her life. And this book is about her childhood. It's about how she came into the organization. It's about how she built herself up enough to become a missionary, which is a very prominent position inside the organization. It's basically as high up as women can go, and how she ended up making this move, and her experiences in China and the people she's meeting and stuff like that, and all these different relationships she's forging. And basically what's important to remember as you read the book is that the work that witnesses do in China, the preaching work that they're so well known for, knocking on your door, it's completely illegal in China. She could be deported for doing it. If somebody who is Chinese was doing it, they would be thrown into prison. So she's doing all of this work underground. So I am a former Jehovah's Witness. I was born into this society and spent 21 years in the society. And so growing up, I knew that there were people who were doing illegal work in China, but of course they don't tell you how they do it, or else it would compromise the situation. So one of the things that was really like kind of personally interesting for me to read was like finally hearing the stories of like how they do what they do. And it turns out to be so benign and boring, and so much less of like spy shit that I had worked up into my mind about how they accomplish this. All they do is that they like make friends on false premises, and don't like tell them, hey, I'm befriending you because I'm trying to convert you. Like they just play like the nice Westerner, and make these friendships, which are quite like deceitful. So the book goes on about like how she kind of comes to realize this, and it ends up breaking apart her marriage. She loses everything, like absolutely everything. She has to move back to New York with literally nothing to her name. It's just completely brilliant, and it's really gratifying as an ex-witness to finally have a memoir like this, which is like, there have been ex-witness manifestos written in the past, but they were designed for ex-witnesses. They were designed for that audience, whereas this is speaking to the general public, and like finally getting this story told is just really gratifying. It's so well written. Her story is just fascinating. She ended up, while she was in China, becoming a podcaster. So she ended up starting a podcast called Ask Amber for the company Chinese Pod, which was all about life in China and all this different stuff. And she became one of the pioneers of podcasting in like 2006, 2007. What's interesting is because the work is banned in China, the normal like schedule of witness life is completely thrown out the window, because you can't go to a whole bunch of meetings every week and stuff like that. So she actually had all this freedom in China that she wouldn't have had in Canada, where she was living. And all through this freedom, you get to explore all these different parts of her life in China and Chinese life, and how it all influenced her belief system and stuff. It's just fascinating. I loved it. I think everyone should read it. Yeah.
It does sound really, really fascinating.
Really,
yeah, I think it's really interesting because I DNF'd it, but there's a little bit about what we were saying about how some of the techniques reminded me a bit of Sex Cult Nun, which, to be fair, I wouldn't recommend. That book is very designed to be shocking, I think, in not a good way. But this sounds like a very, very interesting telling of that loss of faith and how it worked, and how this, yeah, as you say, underground technique worked, and how this all fitted together. It sounds fascinating.
It is
really fascinating.
And it's one of the things that I found, or I guess a little bit shocking, was that the thing that finally got her like not kind of kicked out of China was that as she was realizing that these beliefs sounded crazy and she didn't believe it anymore, she told one of her students that she was trying to convert, you shouldn't just read the books I bring you. You should read other books. Like kind of hinting to her like, kind of don't believe what I've been teaching you anymore. And she said, I can't really continue teaching you anymore. And like that conversation, just saying, hey, you should read other books besides these ones, like landed her in an apostasy trial. And she was just kicked out. And she was told, if you ever try and have a conversation like this again, you will be formally expelled and we will take your family from you. Like, don't cross this line again and get out of China.
That's incredible.
Yeah. So it was just like
terrifying.
Absolutely, like the risks of everything is just heightened in China. It was a really good book. Yeah.
I want to read it. Is there an audio version?
Yes. You know? I think she reads the audio.
I don't think it's something that I'd actually heard of at all until right now. Mm-hmm. I think I need to look it up and get it on my list. I think I've got some audiobook credits that could be used for this.
I'm going to listen to the audio. I definitely got a lot of credits in each using. Oops.
Yeah, that sounds fascinating. So my final top 3 of the year so far is Into Thin Air by Jon Krakauer. Now, I don't think I've read this. No. Now, I don't think I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but if you subscribe to our newsletter, you might have seen some of my thoughts on this already. And I mean, we are big, big fans of Jon Krakauer here on the podcast. You know, if you've listened to some of our previous...
You definitely talked a lot about him in our non-fiction episode, so I'm glad you read this one.
Yeah, he was a journalist as well as an author, so his books are always phenomenally researched. Under the Banner of Heaven, I think I may have talked about possibly a few years ago now, actually, which is a look into Mormonism and has actually recently been turned into a TV, well, not necessarily Mormonism as a whole, but like a subset of Mormonism, and has recently been turned into a TV series with Andrew Garfield and Daisy Edgar Jones, which I haven't watched yet, but is bound to be good with those two. And Into Thin Air is his personal account of the 1997 Mount Everest disaster. Now, Jon Krakauer was a journalist for Outside magazine and was at the time a very keen amateur mountaineer, and he was offered the opportunity by the magazine to go to base camp to report on these tour groups basically leading people up Everest. And he said to the magazine, can you give me a year? Can I train and can I climb the mountain with one of the groups instead? And this costs like 60 grand, or did cost 60 grand back in the 90s when he did this, and now obviously costs an enormous amount more. So he had to kind of convince the magazine to stump up for this, but they did. And so he set off on an expedition with one of the groups called Adventure Consultants, and was writing a piece on what it's like to climb Everest as part of a group like this. So his writing is incredibly detailed because he had a tape recorder with him. He was taking notes anyway. And then when disaster struck, he was, already in the thick of it. And it's an incredibly personal account of one of the worst disasters on Mount Everest, or at the time, the worst disaster to happen on Mount Everest, when basically a hurricane force storm hit the mountain while people were still on the side of it, when they were still at the summit. And it's a really, really interesting look into mountaineering as a sport in general. He talks quite a lot about how people have to basically be mad to climb mountains of this size. It is not something that sane and ordinary people do. But he also talks a lot about why people would climb mountains and what it's like to sort of stand on top of the world like that. And it both really, really, really made me want to go and climb a massive mountain and go for a big hike in the hills, and really, really, really made me never want to climb Mount Everest ever at the same time. So he talks a lot about what happened, what went wrong, and talks also a lot about the people who died, because these were people who he had spent weeks and months with, because to climb Everest is a months-long expedition. I think it's 2 or 3 months you have to kind of dedicate to it, because even to get to base camp is higher than the highest mountains in other countries and other continents. It's ridiculous. So trekking to base camp is in and of itself an adventure that a lot of people do but can go no further. And then you have to do acclimatization to higher altitudes and all this kind of thing. And despite the fact that the tour leader was an incredibly experienced mountaineer, things went wrong. And he talks through some of these things that went wrong. And he slightly controversially talks quite a lot about one of the climbers, one of the kind of the guide climbers, and one of the other groups that was also going for the summit on the same day that his group were. And this has led to a massive, massive controversy. And there's another book that has been written by this guy, Anatoly Bukarev, in response to it, which I'm actually very keen to read, just to kind of hear the other side of the story. But it talks about human error and, you know, actual just things that go wrong in these situations, and how sometimes something can go a little bit wrong and be fine, and sometimes how something can go a little bit wrong and be deadly. And it's things like how you have a turnaround time on a mountain, which is, you know, after this time, you, regardless of where you are, you turn around, you go back to camp, because it will take you too long and otherwise it might get dark. And on this event, this is not a spoiler because this is well publicised, for some reason that wasn't adhered to, and that's part of why so many people died. And it talks a little bit about why that might have happened and the effect that high altitude has on people's brains and people's bodies. And it's just incredibly clever, incredibly evocative. I felt the tension, I felt the stress. It is one of the best pieces of non-fiction writing I think I've read ever. And it's just, even if you don't think you're into non-fiction, even if you think you're not into mountaineering, it's worth giving a go. I listened to the audiobook, and I will say the narrator that I listened to, I didn't love. He was weirdly monotone, and also did some slightly awkward accents, because he kind of put on the accent of whoever he was narrating, which was a little bit awkward when he was, you know, kind of doing some of the Nepalese Sherpas, and also some of the like Aussie women that were involved. So it's bits of it, the audiobook, that kind of really were quite jarring, but don't let that put you off, because it really is just so gripping that I could barely stop listening to it.
I love mountaineering, disaster type books. I know far too much about that event than is normal, I'm sure.
I've heard nothing but good things. I'm going to read it one day.
You should. You really should. I mean, this event, though, it's just... Jenny, we should have a little debrief about it, because, there's so many things that should have happened and could have happened, and how things could have gone differently. But also things that could have not gone any differently.
Interesting look into... Because they were very experienced tour guides as well. And they both died.
Yeah.
And yeah, the whole controversy between John Krakauer and I don't know the other chap's name.
Anatoly Bukarev.
Yeah, and because he descended, didn't he? And he didn't help them down. Stating that actually he was trying to like preserve his energy levels because he knew that they would need rescuing. So yeah, the whole thing's fascinating. And just nobody knows why they didn't turn around before their turnaround time. Like, it's obviously people speculate, and the film Everest is based on the Everest disaster, which I did as a disaster movie. I enjoyed it quite a lot,
and it stays quite close to Krakauer's book in terms of the timeline and the people it focuses on. It's a good one.
And that film obviously speculates that they didn't turn around because the chap that was about to reach the summit had tried about 3 different times, and it was just like just a pile up of lots of different reasons why it happened. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. There's another really good one about K2 as well, which I'm not going to remember the name of, but they're probably on my Goodreads. Probably a list on my Goodreads somewhere of just mountain disaster books.
Is it called K2 Life and Death on the World's Most Dangerous Mountain by Ed Vestas? Or is it No Way Down?
I don't know. I can't remember the date of the K2 disaster either, but
it could also be Buried in the Sky. There are a lot of books about K2.
I mean, it's not a good idea to climb a mountain, I don't think.
No, Bit dangerous. Bit risky. Maybe stick to nice gentle rambles in the hills.
Ben Nevis is the highest mountain I've ever climbed and the highest one I'm going to.
Snowdon for me. It's not that big.
No.
I don't think I've ever climbed a mountain.
I think our definition of mountain is probably quite different to the US definition of mountain as well.
So some big old mountains in the US, so...
But yeah, loved it. Thanks, guys, for sharing your favourite reads of the first half of 2022. We hope you've enjoyed the episode. I would really, really love to hear your favourite books of the first half of the year. And if you agree with any of ours, please do let us know. Ways to contact us include our email address, which is thebookcastclub@outlook.com. And you can also contact us on Twitter and Instagram. We are at Bookcast Club on both of those. You can also leave us a message. We have a voice message line that we can play on the podcast. There will be a link to this in the show notes. Please do leave us voice notes. We would really love to hear your voices. Make this a two-way conversation. You can also sign up to our newsletter for more reviews, new releases, podcast recommendations, and updates on the podcast. There will also be a link in the show notes for that. And finally, we would be very, very grateful if you would also check out our Patreon. As we said, tiers start at just $2 a month, which is not too expensive, less than the price of a coffee, and we would be eternally grateful if you did choose to support the pod in that way. But as ever, thank you so much for listening, and look forward to speaking to you again soon.